The scripture for today comes from Jeremiah chapter 32, verses 6 through 15. Jeremiah said, "The Lord's word came to me. Your cousin Hanamel, Shallum's son, is on his way to see you, and when he arrives, he will tell you, 'Buy my field in Anathoth, for by law you are next in line to purchase it.' And just as the Lord had said, my cousin Hanamel showed up at the prison quarters and told me, 'Buy my field in Anathoth in the land of Benjamin, for you are next in line and have a family obligation to purchase it.' Then I was assured this was the Lord's doing. So I bought the field in Anathoth from my cousin Hanamel and weighed out for him 17 shekels of silver. I signed the deed, sealed it, had it witnessed, and weighed out the silver on the scales. Then I took the deed of purchase, the sealed copy, along with the terms, its conditions, the sealed copy with its terms and conditions, and the unsealed copy, and gave it to Baruch, Neriah's son, and Maaseiah's grandson, before my cousin Hanamel and the witnesses named in the deed, as well as before all the Judeans who were present in the prison quarters. I charged Baruch before all of them. The Lord of heavenly forces, the God of Israel, proclaims, 'Take these documents, this sealed deed of purchase, along with the unsealed one, and put them into a clay container so they will last a long time. The Lord of heavenly forces, the God of Israel, proclaims, houses, fields, and vineyards will again be bought in this land.'" Please stand.
So today marks the end of our trek through Jeremiah, and over these past weeks we've been digging into that book, and it's not exactly a book where hope abounds or springs eternal. You kind of have to really look for the hope or the good news in the midst of this book from time to time. So let's just do a really quick recap of where we're at. In Jeremiah's time and place, life for the people of Israel was pretty hopeless. It's a time where you'd have to dig really, really deep just to find any hope or see any possibility of a future at all. In fact, they're in the middle of a war, and they have little, if any, chance of surviving the war that's going on around them. Jerusalem is surrounded by soldiers, and Babylon has overtaken them and has left a trail of death and destruction in its path. And by this time, the siege had been going on for a couple of years, and so Jeremiah's people are literally starving in the streets. I don't think it takes much to conjure up an image of that if you just take a few minutes and look at your news, and sometimes with the pictures that they show of what to get any kind of an idea what the devastation might have been that they were living through at that time. There's not enough food and there's not enough water, and a sense of discouragement hangs over them like a storm cloud. And to top it all off, Jeremiah's job, we were told early on, was to pluck up and pull down and destroy and overthrow and then build and plant. He's now imprisoned in the king's palace, and he's being silenced because he prophesied against the king. These are a people without any hope, and Jerusalem is soon to fall. Surely, they ask, have we no hope? Is there nothing out there for us? What about all those promises that God made to us? Weren't we to be a great nation? Isn't that what we were told? Why would God abandon us to the armies of Babylon? Why would God do that? Of course, Jeremiah has been preaching to them over and over and over again and been begging them to turn back to God, but they refused. And they didn't see any wisdom in returning to God's ways, and so they failed to read the signs of the times. So what now? What are these people to do when hope is gone and their lives are under siege? Sometimes, much like the people in Jeremiah's day, hope can be somewhat hard to find. Where is hope when the dread of war is a reality? It's often hard to see a way forward when we're being battered by the present. What are we to do when we live in a world where fewer and fewer people receive justice, where race, economic status, and one's wealth seems to slant the balance of a just society against us, where violence seems to reign in some communities, where terrorists bomb marketplaces and armed gunmen shoot up our city streets and schools? On the flip side, we know not all wars are fought on land, and some are fought from within us. A mother loses a child to gun violence. How does she go on? Where is hope when one's lost their way and mental health care is not available or is out of reach? Where is hope when a family has become so estranged they can no longer talk to one another? Where is hope when the economy has resulted in the loss of our income and we've lost our job? What do we do when we know that there's supposed to be a light at the end of the tunnel, but for the life of us, we can't find the light at the end of the tunnel? What do we do when what seems broken inside of us might never be healed? Where's the hope when there's a war that's raging on within us? Do we just quit and give up when things look bleak and everything seems to be crumbling? When our lives seem to be surrounded by enemies that we can't even name? In truth, I don't think the question is so much about what to do, in as much as it is what will we do in the face of a world that's overrun by suffering, in a world that's in opposition to the purposes of God, a kingdom of peace and justice for all. Because that is Jeremiah's world. How do we respond when we live in a world that is broken and bruised and battered, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any better? Because it was into the midst of such a world that all this uncertainty, that a word from God came to Jeremiah. It was a strange word. It was a really weird word, and it was a word that made absolutely no sense. But it was a word from God nonetheless. And it wasn't a word that was going to stop the war from smashing Jerusalem. But it was a word that years later would provide a way forward for God's people. And Jeremiah says, "The Lord's word came to me, your cousin Hanamel is on his way to see you, and when he arrives, he will tell you, buy my field in Anathoth, for by law you are next in line to purchase it." Okay. And at first, Jeremiah, he's not really convinced that he heard God correctly until his cousin actually shows up with the exact same instructions. Coincidence? Maybe. It makes sense that Hanamel would want to dump this piece of property off on somebody else. After all, the property is only a few minutes from Jerusalem. It's currently being occupied by the Babylonian army, so essentially it's a worthless piece of land. Who wouldn't want to be rid of it? I mean, in today's world, we call this guy a cheat. And it makes no sense that anyone at all would buy this land. Most of us here today are sensible people, and we know you don't spend your last few bucks on something that looks like a scam, that doesn't make any sense and appears to have no benefit. When everybody in town's telling you you can't buy it, you can't grow anything on that land, how likely are you to buy it? And when you only have a few shekels to your name and your people are starving and discouraged and doom is imminent, why in the world would you buy a valueless piece of dirt that you're never going to profit from? Because it's unlikely that Jeremiah is ever going to live long enough to see anything built on this land. Seriously, if we know someone who did that, what would we do? We'd be the laughing stock of the community, not to mention a source of town gossip. Let's face it, God telling Jeremiah to buy a piece of dirt in Jerusalem right now isn't by anyone's standards a good business deal. Because the land that he's going to buy is about to become a smoking battlefield. It's a pointless purchase when the entire population is about to be killed or deported. It makes no sense. It isn't a wise investment, no matter how you look at it. Jeremiah has been prophesying for 2 decades that Babylon was going to level Jerusalem, and now when they're right outside the gates, he buys a piece of dirt. And what makes this even more absurd is that Jeremiah can't even see the property before he buys it because, well, he's in jail. So it's not like he can go survey it and say, well, there might be a possibility here. He can't even do that. Family law or customs or no customs. This is the very definition of stupidity. Which one of you in Jeremiah's position would call up your local real estate agent and say, I think I want to buy that? Likely not one of you. If it was free, you might take it. But to spend your last bit of cash on it, no. And yet Jeremiah does the unthinkable thing. Seems to me Jeremiah and Jason Davis are singing the same song, Buy Dirt. Some of those lyrics go, you've probably heard it. If you want my 2 cents on making a dollar count, buy dirt. Because the truth about it is it all goes by real quick. You can't buy happiness, but you can buy dirt. And thank the good Lord for it, because he ain't making any more of it. So buy dirt. And that's what Jeremiah does. Why? Because Jeremiah doesn't see it as an investment in the immediate future, but instead a purchase of hope. And he knows that in the worst of times, hope comes from really unexpected places and is only visible to those who can see beyond today. He knows sometimes when life makes no sense at all and hope has disappeared, we have to trust God and envision a future that we can't see, might not ourselves even benefit from, but are the ones who hold up hope in front of the hopeless. And that's what Jeremiah does. Buys dirt because he saw his cousin's offer to be a sign of hope and a source of future blessings. Since God told him to buy that, Jeremiah saw it as a sign that God would someday reverse Israel's fortunes. He saw it as a sign that God had neither forgotten them or left them to their own devices. So Jeremiah says to the people, you see this? The promises of God always hold. You can stand on the promises of God because way back when you were traipsing through the desert, God promised Moses that you would always own this land. So you'll only lose it for a time maybe. But in the moment of crisis and in the midst of that raging war, it seemed as if the promises of God would be forgotten. So that piece of land in years to come is going to be a testimony to God, that God is the one who keeps promises, and when God makes promises, he keeps them. So today's text is a reminder to us that God never forgets that while things may appear dreary and dismal, we can stand on the promises of God. And then, as if to back up those promises, God tells Jeremiah, take these documents, the sealed deed of purchase along with the unsealed one, and put them into a clay container so that they'll last a long time. And so, in an act of faith and trust in the promises of God, Jeremiah does what he's told to do, and he signs the documents and holds them up before the people and gives them a visual sermon, if you will, a way of expressing hope and his desire to trust in God that things would indeed get better, even if he did not live himself to experience better. And then Jeremiah tells Baruch to put the documents in a clay pot, and consequently, that little clay pot becomes what cradles Israel's future and becomes a symbol of hope for God's people as that war rages on. Jeremiah, by putting those documents in a sealed clay pot, does what is necessary to assure that the deeds of the purchase would outlast war and destruction. If you remember, it was 1948 when the Dead Sea Scrolls were first discovered by Bedouin shepherds. As the story goes, some little boys were throwing rocks into the openings at the base of the Balsat Cliffs in the Dead Sea areas of Palestine. And when they threw in one of those rocks, they heard an immediate cracking and a breaking sound, and it was a clay pot. Scientists came back with them and investigated the opening and discovered the first Qumran caves. Around the broken clay jar were many jars, which were sealed and unbroken. And as extraordinary as that discovery is, what makes it really remarkable is that those clay pots had been sealed and had stayed hidden in that spot, dating from the 3rd century CE to the 1st century CE. You see, those clay pots had held and preserved over 900 texts in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, including every book of the Hebrew Bible except for Esther and Nehemiah, the largest being close to the complete book of Isaiah. So when I put that into the context of Jeremiah, when Jeremiah put those documents in that clay pot, he put the indisputable promises of God in that pot and sealed it up to preserve his people's future. Because that's how people stored things back then. It was like a safety deposit box of today. The purchase that Jeremiah made that day wasn't so much that he was making an investment in the future, as much it was a statement about the future. We were here, we lived, and we believe that God will restore us. Yes, Jeremiah knew those documents weren't going to mean a thing anytime soon. But he also knew that things wouldn't stay that way forever. 70 years is a long time. And so Jeremiah knew he wasn't going to be the one to reclaim that land. He didn't buy dirt for himself, but for future generations. He purchased signal to his people that the one who brought warnings of destruction was also the God who would bring restoration. So Jeremiah, in buying dirt, was investing in the future of God's redemptive agenda. Listen to the last verse. Houses, fields, and vineyards will again be brought into this land. God makes it clear to Jeremiah that the Israelites would one day again buy and sell land in Judah. They would one day return to the land and resume life again. You see, there's always hope. No matter what our situation is or how broken we are, no matter how dismal and bleak the days ahead may look, today's text reminds us that God's got a plan and life's going to resume, and that whatever happens in this life, that there's always hope. Now, when our hopes and dreams are under siege, if we act in faith and trust in the promises of God, one day restoration will come. Jeremiah's purchase stands as a testimony of what faith and hope in God can do. So it reminds us that as God's people in this world today, we are a people of hope. And as a people of hope, we live in hope, and we rest in the hope and the promises of God. Our closing hymn.